Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Expats Exposed Podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, I have a podcast called Expats Exposed, where some friends and people who lived abroad share stories about living in different countries, and I also share my personal experiences. So just type Expats Exposed on your favorite streaming platform, and you'll find the podcast with more than 30 episodes now. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the reasons why people decided to move to a different country. So I asked some friends to record their answer to the question, what pushed you to pack your bags and move to a new country? So we're going to be listening to their answers. I haven't listened to any of their answers yet. And we're going to be discussing the reasons behind it. Was it because you're looking for a new job somewhere? Perhaps you were just tired of your life back in your home country. Did you actually decide to, get married, move somewhere? So we're going to be listening to the reasons why they moved abroad and how easy or how difficult was the whole process. We're going to start with Guilherme. He is in his mid-20s. He's from Brazil, but he moved to Colombia just 6 months ago in 2025 and is now working in Bogota here in Colombia as a Portuguese teacher. So let's first listen to Guilherme.
Well, I gotta tell you that back when I was in Brazil, I had always had this wish to go abroad and to have the opportunity to work as a teacher abroad. And then early this year, I came across a job offer. Actually was a selection process for Portuguese teachers here in Colombia to work at a language institute here. And when I saw the opportunity, I jumped at it. Like I didn't think twice. I had already come to Colombia before. I had actually come here twice last year. And so I actually knew what to expect from this country. Actually, it's a country that I fell in love with right from the beginning, back when I started studying Spanish and I started watching Colombian series. So it's a country that, I knew what to expect from it right from the beginning. And this is one of the reasons why when I was hired, I decided to pack my bags and come here. So, and I have no regrets. Like it has been a wonderful experience. I've been living here for 4 months and I've been having a blast here. It's a country that I absolutely love. And to have the opportunity to share my language and my culture with Colombians and people from here, like it's an amazing opportunity. And it's a new experience for me. It was challenging in the beginning, of course, but it's something that it's a country I absolutely fell in love with right from the beginning. So yeah.
Something really interesting about what Guilherme said is that he's always wanted to live abroad, and that I can totally relate to that because that's always been a desire for me. That was a big desire for me when I was in high school, when I was 16 years old, and I studied at an American school so I could speak fluently Portuguese and English, and I was also learning French, and I wanted to go to France and I wanted to explore there. I wanted to improve my language, but this passion had always been there in my case as well. I didn't move before. I only moved when I was 33, so I kind of had to wait 16 more years till I finally moved out of Brazil. But before that, of course, I traveled a lot. I visited many countries in Europe, South America, North America. So, but this passion is what fuels a lot of people, and I can totally relate to that. And also something very interesting is that he said that he had the job offer before, which I think is very important when you decide to move to a new country. Some people go without a job and decide to find things there, which is a bit more challenging, but it's doable if you know where you're going, if you plan in advance with your savings and everything. But he also said that he had been to Colombia before, so he knew what to expect, which in a case is very interesting because when I moved to China, I had no idea what to expect back in 2015. I had an idea from YouTube videos, but I didn't know if I was gonna be able to adapt to that country. And this is something that I think it's really important, especially like in my case, my first time when I moved abroad was when I was 33. Guilherme, I think, was 25 when he came here to Bogota, if I'm not mistaken. But something very interesting is like, I'm sure from what Guilherme said that he was a bit scared, even though he already knew the country, he could speak the language, and he had a job offer, but he was scared, and he was like, what if it doesn't, go right and something. And this is the same feeling I had when I was 33 and moved to China. I was also very scared, especially because in my case, I didn't know the language, I didn't know the culture. Everything I knew, all the information I had was from YouTube videos. I didn't know anyone there, and I knew it was going to be a big change going from Brazil, South America, to Asia, to China. But that's one of the things that I usually tell my friends. It's like, of course I was scared. Of course I was worried. What if it doesn't work out and stuff? But when these things happen, I usually say, you know what? If you've planned, if you thought about it, if you have your savings, just go with fear and do your best. Worst that can happen is you don't like it, you don't adapt to it, you spend more than 3-6 months there and you still don't like the place. You can go back, you can move to a new country. So I think, of course, for Guilherme, who was 10 years younger than me when I moved the first time, it is a bit easier to adapt and to meet people and stuff. But even when you are 33 or 43 or 53, it's about, go, because it's not easy. Even if you have your job, you're married, you're going with your family, all of that. Even with all of that, there's still going to be a bit of fear there, which is normal, but do it anyway, I'd say, if you got everything planned and ready. So now we're going to listen to Pavel. Pavel is a friend that I met here in Colombia, in Bogota, in my first year here. And he is from Siberia. He came here to work, and then he moved to Peru, and now he lives in Santiago de Chile. So let's listen to Pavel.
The first time I packed my bags and left home was right after finishing the university. I moved to China, and my main motivation at that time, initial motivation, was to deepen my knowledge in Chinese language and culture, and maybe have some professional growth, see the opportunities and everything like this. But over the time, I just really got used to living outside of Siberia and Russia. And years later, when I came back to Russia, it became very clear to me that I simply couldn't live there anymore because of the political situation. I have never felt safe, and since then I looked for opportunity to move away. Doesn't matter where, only the country there would live safely. This is how I ended up living in Latin America.
Wow, that's really interesting, because in Pavel's case, he moved to China first, neighboring country from Russia, from Siberia, where he's from. He moved to China first to deepen his knowledge on Chinese language, Chinese culture. But then what I think is very interesting about what he said is that when he went back to Russia, went back to Siberia, he just felt like he couldn't be there anymore and that he had to move abroad and move somewhere. He did mention political reasons. He didn't feel safe there. So these external factors are also a big reason why people decide to leave their countries. He mentioned that, but I believe that, even though of course he is from Siberia, when he moved back, in a way, when we move back to our countries, we expect to feel comfortable at home. And it's interesting that Pavel said that, because during the pandemic, I was gonna leave China eventually in 6 months, but I had to leave China earlier due to the pandemic, and I stayed in Brazil during this time, during the 2 years of nearly 2 years of the pandemic. But what's very interesting is that every time, not only this time, but every time I went back to Brazil, I felt this reverse culture shock. I felt that I didn't belong there anymore, but at the same time, I didn't feel that I belonged to China as well. So it's an ambiguous, mixed, weird feeling that I had, and that I believe Pavel had as well. And so in his case, he said, I'm gonna go anywhere as long as I leave Russia. So he decided to come to Latin America, which is, we got our political issues here, but it is nothing like, what he had in Russia. And I know Pavel, of course, I know he's really happy there in Chile. And yeah, I also think that when we decide to move somewhere and we know that there is no going back, then things are a bit different. Like, I mean, even if it's hard to adapt somewhere, we will try even harder than someone who's just going there, as an expat and see, I'll try to find a job here. It is totally different. That's what I believe that Pavel was thinking when he arrived here in Latin America, and he was like, this gotta work. This gotta work, because I'm not going back to Russia. That's not an option. So sometimes the fear that I mentioned at the beginning with Guilherme's answer, and also in my case when I moved to China, the fear of what if it doesn't work. In his case, I think, in Pavel's case, I think it's even like, it's got to work. There's no plan B. So I think that's very interesting. And we're going to listen to Erik. So Erik is from Colombia, and he has lived abroad. He now came back here to Bogota, where he works at an international school. Let's listen to Erik.
Honestly, what really pushed me to pack my bags was curiosity and maybe a little bit of restlessness. I'd been abroad before, don't get me wrong, to the States, Venezuela, Spain, even France, but always just for holidays. It wasn't until I won the scholarship to study English in Toronto that things changed. It was supposed to be just 5 weeks, just a short program, but you know how life loves to surprise us. So 5 weeks turned into 2 years. I started picking up part-time jobs, a waiter at this gastropub, later with a nonprofit, and that's where I discovered a whole new side of myself. It wasn't just about improving my English anymore. It was more about independence, growth, even, I would say, figuring out who I was outside of my comfort zone. Everything I knew, right? And well, I guess I should thank Toronto, because those 2 years taught me more about myself than I ever imagined. Who knows, maybe that's also why I'm here now, letting you get to know me a little better too.
Wow. So yeah, it's very interesting what Erik said, that 5 weeks turned into 2 years. So he got a scholarship, went to Toronto. The idea was to stay there for only 5 weeks, improve his English, and come back here to Colombia. But then he got a part-time job. He said that he got one job here and there, gastropub. And then that's when he found out a whole different side, as he said, a whole new side of myself, which is very interesting, because these are things like for example, a part-time job at a gastropub, for example. It's something that some of us wouldn't do back home. These are jobs that we think that we wouldn't do in our countries, for example. But then that Erik said, if I want to stay here, I need a job. I'll find whatever job there is. And it was through these jobs, working in something totally different from his current job as head of department in a school, from these completely different jobs, that he found out a lot about himself. And as he said, the 2 years he spent there taught a lot about himself and about life. And these are things, when I mention a lot about moving abroad, and some people say, well, that's the same thing that, would happen to anyone in their home country or anywhere else. It's not about living abroad. It's these things of, number one, that Erik mentioned, the jobs that he had that he didn't have back home. And number two, it's like someone who doesn't move to a different country, there are certain things, there are certain situations that they will never be able to go through, because it's just not possible to go through some of these experiences of starting from scratch, of having to look for a job in a different language, with a boss from a different country, with working with people, in his case, in a bar, in a pub, like working with people from different countries, and all of these things that are just not possible to happen back in your home country. So when he says that he found out a lot about himself, he felt independent there. It's because it's not easy. It's not easy to find a job when you are in a different country with a different language and a different culture. So that's when you feel like, yeah, I feel more independent than ever, because if I can make it here, then I can do this anywhere else in the world, which is also related to, as he mentioned, when he was outside of his comfort zone, that he was able to grow independently and learn so much about himself. And for a lot of people, being back home, being back in their hometown, is staying in their comfort zone, which is obvious. Like you know people. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy to find a job, work, live, and everyone has problems in their hometown, in their another town, in their own country. But it was when he decided to leave his comfort zone that he was able to grow, to find a lot about himself, to know who he really was, what were his priorities. And it's very interesting in his case, for example, which in my case in China and in Guilherme's case, we both had jobs. Like we had job offers before we moved to the country. In Erik's case, there was no job. There was only a scholarship, a plan to improve his English, to learn about the culture, to live there for a while, for only 5 weeks. And it was only there that he was like, well, if I want to stay here, I got to find a job. I got to, and that's also a bit harder when you don't have a job in a place, and of course, you got to pay your bills, and then you go in and look for a job there. So I think this is a bit different from what Guilherme said and from my story. However, I can relate to this because when I moved to Colombia, I did have a job, an online job. So I didn't look for a job as soon as I got here. But as soon as I decided to stay in the country, to stay in Bogota, and I changed my LinkedIn to Bogota, that's when I started looking for jobs. And it's that thing, like I work with English teaching, so I don't have to speak fluent Spanish to do my job here or anywhere in the world. But I worked for 3 Colombian companies. So it was hard in the beginning, to adapt to the culture. Again, as Erik had to adapt to Canadian bosses and co-workers, or even internet. Toronto is very international, so he probably had co-workers from all over the world. In my case here, I had co-workers from all over Colombia in the beginning, and then the third company I work now, I have 50 locals, Colombian co-workers and foreigners. So in a way, it's something that I would never have experienced if I were back in Brazil, working in a school there with Brazilian students and Brazilian co-workers and Brazilian managers. Same with Erik as well. So I think that the 3 stories we've heard, it's about we can go with a job or without a job. Of course, the second option is going to be a bit more challenging. Sometimes we go because we got a scholarship or because we just want, like Erik said, just want to improve my English. Or sometimes we go because we cannot go back, like Pavel said. And then what motivates us is going to be sometimes these external factors. Sometimes it's deep inside, as Guilherme said, I've always had this desire to leave my country and have some experience abroad, which, as I mentioned, I've had this since I was 16 years old in high school, imagining myself abroad in a different country, improving my French, or even going to university. Like many of my friends at the American school went to university in the US. I couldn't afford, even with a partial scholarship, or I couldn't afford, so that was not an option for me. But then with all of these reasons and behind the motivation to leave abroad, I would say after 10 years living outside Brazil, I would say that fear is always going to be there, no matter what. But I also think that planning is essential, especially when you are in your late 30s, 40s, because you already have, perhaps you have an established career back home. So I think planning is essential financially. When I moved to China the first time, I remember that I had enough money to buy a ticket back to Brazil. If everything went wrong, I knew I could go and buy a ticket and fly back to Brazil. And it's not cheap. So I had this money saved. Planning is essential, but also your emotional health. Sometimes we do learn a lot. Sometimes we learn a lot, as Erik said, about yourself when you are abroad. But the more you have your emotional health ready for this big move, because it is a big change, to accept that things won't be the same when you get to a place. When you are emotionally healthy to leave your country, then I think things are a bit easier. Actually, not easier. I think that you are more well prepared to face the challenges, face the difficulties. That when you ask yourself the question, did I do the right thing? Is this really where I want to be? And these moments happen, no matter what. When you ask yourself this question, you're going to be better prepared to face these moments of doubts, because deep inside you're going to be okay, and you're going to be aware of the reasons why you left. So I think that it's about planning, mental health, and the fear that is always going to be there, because this fear is also what makes the experience so different and the experience so rewarding. So I'd say if you're thinking about moving abroad, you have an external factor, an internal factor, whatever it is. If you have your mental health okay, if you have your savings, if you are afraid but you've planned well, then go. Because worst that can happen, you don't adapt, you don't like the country, you miss home. It's not failure, it's just part of it. Buy a ticket, fly back home, or move to another country. I hope you liked this episode. Please leave a comment if you're listening to this on Spotify. Give me 5 stars if you like the episode. Please, this is really important. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like the video. I'll see you next time. Thank you.